Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. My name is Hollow and today I've got a horrible task to take on. Josh has challenged me to rank every game in the Soulsborne series so far and place it into a tier list and give my subjective opinion on each. If my online alias isn't a giveaway, I love the From Software games and the Soulsborne series and have been playing them since the original Demon Souls. I played all the original versions as well as the remade or remastered versions and all the DLC, but my task is to put them now into a tier list and try to keep it interesting. So rather than put them all in S and A tier, we got a few tiers here to look at, to compare them against one another. But to be clear, I've enjoyed all of these games, and while I think only a couple of them are masterpieces, all of them are fantastic games. So I'm going to do something that might be a bit surprising, and I'm going to start top to bottom, starting with the S tier picks. I think it's most predictable which games are going to be at the top, so let's just begin with that. Firstly, with Elden Ring. This is a masterclass of reuse assets, the game. Of course, a world this huge with this much detail in it, it was well served by reusing assets from the other games. Many sections of this game make me feel like I'm playing one of the earlier titles, like the Catacombs, which are clearly inspired or taken from the Chalice dungeons of Bloodborne. The many monsters and enemies and boss fights are familiar or remade for Elden Ring, but why it actually works is an important detail. They haven't one-for-one copied anything, they've just altered it slightly or massively, even if the base of it is something we've seen before. So using this clever approach, they were able to pack this open world with so much to do, so much to see, meaning it lasts an insanely long time. By no means was this a perfectly done thing though. The game as a whole has its flaws. Balancing was a major and valid criticism for Elden Ring, endgame enemies dealing silly damage, a whole archetype of weapons not working in Arcane at launch, a ton of bugs and unintended interactions with items and otherwise. The game needed patches and updates to really bring it to its current form, but I found this added to the life of the game. It's changed a lot since its original launch. Even the map has more detail to it than it had before, and it's just kept things interesting. And while I don't think it was a perfect game, I think the attempt was something special. The new story style was well appreciated by me. I grew a bit tired of the Dark Souls story they re-released 3 times. I find that From Software shine the most when they aren't necessarily shackled to repetitive concepts, like a series, and are at the best when they can go mad on a new IP and try anything they want. Bloodborne, Dark Souls 1, Sekiro, these are familiar to one another, and yet very different conceptually. Elden Ring easily works its way into that. As their first open world game, working with someone like George R.R. Martin to create this world conceptually, the entire new mechanics like say Torrent with your mounting, it was a very fresh game for the series. And yet, the best version in my opinion of the combat of Souls, enhanced by all the lessons of the series itself. Things like power stancing from Dark Souls 2, the much faster pace of combat like Bloodborne, Sekiro and the ability to stealth or jump, the weapon arts of Dark Souls 3. There's so many examples of this. Elden Ring really couldn't exist and be as good as it is without what came before. It's a celebration of everything the devs have learned making this series and have been working towards. So while it certainly has its flaws, I still view it as a masterpiece and a game that I will remember as one of the best I've ever played. Clearly, that makes it an S tier pick. But what of my other S tier pick? For me, that's Bloodborne, and it's actually rated just a bit higher to the left here of Elden Ring. It is my favorite game of the series for many reasons. Where Bloodborne is also not the perfect game, it achieves what it set out to do a bit smoother. A major shift in the Souls series based combat, where it introduced many things like the rally system that let you heal after taking damage by attacking as fast as you can, shields being completely removed and joked about in-game, shirking that turtle playstyle for something entirely new. How do you make parrying more fun and satisfying? Make it a ranged parry, make it a gun. How about the base movement? Your combat roll is gone here, replaced by the slickest slide evade known to man. The weapons are the coolest in the entire series. The trick weapons are these incredible transforming options you choose between. A straight sword suddenly becoming a heavy hammer, a curved blade turning into a bow, a cane turning into a whip. This simple but fantastic concept allows you to tackle enemies in a variety of ways. It means one playthrough can be much less limited by playstyle, and not only that, but it looks and feels so cool. But that's just the gameplay side of it. No game in the Soulsborne series, but Bloodborne, has had me with hairs standing on end. The first half is what you expected, that beast hunting joy, but the second half is cosmic horror. Giant alien beasts are all over the place, leering and looming over you in the city you thought you knew. The whole world is turned on its head and the truth is revealed. And suddenly you're very small. So much of what you've experienced so far totally changes. And in that second playthrough, you know what's going on, and it changes everything. That curse of knowledge in a wonderful, horrific fashion. The history of Yharnam and its people, the cursed blood, beasts all over the shop. It was a total reimagining of the Soulsborne style of game and its combat. An incredible story, brilliantly told, with some of the coolest combat we've ever seen. So Bloodborne, in my opinion, is the true masterpiece of the series, and that's why it's my favorite game of them all. Okay, let's work our way down from the top now, down to A tier, where things might be a bit less predictable. The first game I played in full from this series was Dark Souls 1, and it is an A tier pick for me. The number one detail that comes to mind when I talk about this game is level design. It's the best they've ever had. I have this poster that displays the entire game in one image, and that's just how clever it actually is. And while the level design was an incredible feature of this game, it's a big deal for the whole series. It was the start of the Dark Souls series. It took the concept that began with Demon Souls and refined it. A similar game ultimately, but simply improved. Iconic areas like Anor Londo, Sen's Fortress, Gravelord Nito's Wild Ride, which is definitely the real name. That DLC featuring Artorias, the coolest character in the entire series, and the early hints of, say, Bloodborne with the character Chester. Brilliant moments like stepping into the woods and being punched by a mushroom. The story, the characters, the world, the level design, it was all wonderful. It was so fun. But it wasn't perfect, obviously. It's very dated now as well. The combat, the movement is so clunky. It's simple and very repetitive these days. Even at release, it had some issues like PvP. What a desync-filled mess. Far from balanced, but still so fun. And you know, that clunkiness, it might be a problem for some people, especially people who go back to try it for the first time now. But it feels like a lost era of gaming to me. I still really appreciate it when I go back and play it. Even if I have to queue up my attacks, or maybe I accidentally roll the wrong way because I can't roll in a 360 direction. I know new players that go back to this, maybe since they played Elden Ring and want to see what came before, might have a tough time with how clunky it is to play. You know, so much polish and so much quality of life has happened to this series by comparison. But to me, it's that old RPG style that I remember fondly. A favorite of the series for so long for me, but I acknowledge that it is dated. So that's why I drop it down to an A rather than an S. Also in A tier though, has got to be Dark Souls 3. Before Elden Ring, I'd have called this the peak of the Souls series combat. Introducing those new mechanics like, weapon arts, the much more exciting magic and options with that, the much more fluid movement and player control, much like Bloodborne. God, it was so fun to play, especially the PvP in this. I spent hundreds of hours fighting around the icy version of Anor Londo, running around the giants, the archers, and dueling in that arena behind pontiffs. I'd make a new character just to pick a weapon and a playstyle, stream that playthrough, and then just PvP for hours. The gameplay was the true sequel to Dark Souls 1 rather than 2 for me. While the story felt, more repetitive than I'd like, basically a retelling of Dark Souls 1 with new names, I loved what they were going for. Way more options, way more weapons, a much better version of that OG combat, and a massive amount of fun bosses with a variety of playstyles themselves. And clever level design, much like the original. So many sections you could look at an area you're going to go to much later, or back at where you've been. That clever aspect of introducing new areas, but new versions of the OG Souls ones as well. Realizing, hang on a minute, I know where I am, but so much further in the future. And with not one but 2 DLCs, that kept the life of the game going a lot longer, with familiar themes brought forward in a better way. If I had to criticize the game, it would come down to the lack of story innovation. Like I said, an improved version of what I'd already played, but kind of what I already played. It's not a bad thing. I still rate the game really high. I love this game, but to challenge it in some way, it has to be the story and how it was largely the same, which is the result of the concept. It's just a progression of the cycle that we already saw and continued in the main ending of Dark Souls 1. Continued and repeated again and again. The levels often represent that. The major characters, like say, the Onion Knight with a similar storyline, or the bosses like the Abyss Watchers, who were super cool, but just again a continuation of Artorias. Even the final boss is a representation of that, the Soul of Cinder being the joined forces of all who sacrificed themselves to keep the flame alive. I remember the Bloodborne story, the concepts there, Sekiro, and now Elden Rings, much more than I remember Dark Souls 3, which were repetitive. So I guess I prefer the idea of something new than the repeat of something I already experienced, but all the same, God did I love that game. But now we drop down in the B tier, and we're going to begin with an incredible game, Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. A radically different game for the Soulsborne series. This Eastern-focused game introduced many new concepts. Stealth, the grappling hook, aerial combat, the trick weapon style in a prosthetic arm, the revive mechanic, posture, it just seems to go on and on and on. Much like Bloodborne, Sekiro took the risk to create a new core to the combat and then based the whole game around it. Posture is this bar you had, and an enemy has as well, and when broken, you can perform an execution. That will then kill an enemy instantly, unless they have multiple health bars, which is another new concept. Not just a phase in a fight, literal levels to an enemy's health bar that you could work your way through with either regular damage or posture breaks. To break an enemy's or preserve your own, you need to land a perfect parry by blocking at the last moment. This concept led to hyper fast combo of attacks with you or the enemies against you, like a rhythm game. Those that understood and enjoyed this concept loved it. I know I did, but understandably, that rubbed people the wrong way as well. Those who generally liked to evade attacks rather than parry. Those that relied on their shield to block their way through. Not a thing here. This led to the most unique boss designs in the series. The incredible Lord Ishin is one of my favorites, if not my favorite in the whole series. But sadly, this design philosophy, it led to something a bit sad. The lack of PvP. Due to the unique character you had to be rather than make your own, and the combat simply not working for this system. Now I appreciate the different style, it was a risky option after what did work for them for so long, and yet they did it anyway because innovation is worth striving for. They learned a lot from Sekiro clearly. After all, things like stealth and a form of posture, even the leaping and jumping aspect of combat, that all came forward into Elden Ring. Just toned back, obviously. The ability to make your own character and make your own build has major impact in replayability, and that was Sekiro's biggest weakness. So while I love this world, this story, this combat, this game, I acknowledge that a major complaint for it was the lack of replayability. And that's why I put it a B tier compared to the rest, even though it is one of my favorite games of all time. Because yeah, I fucking love these games. We only have 2 more left, and it's another in the B tier for me, the Demon Souls original. My first taste of the series on a friend's PlayStation when I had no idea what I was doing and kind of just watched. It wasn't until Dark Souls 1 that I truly got into the game and series. Now, going back and playing the full thing later, after already playing Dark Souls 1 and 2, I could see how Dark Souls 1 really was the remake of Demon Souls. A very similar story, a similar world, similar characters, just with the combat improved in Dark Souls, along with the boss design and level design and so on. I still love Demon Souls though. Much like the dated nature of Dark Souls 1, Demon Souls has this satisfying old RPG style that I really appreciate. And it set up the foundations for what we have today, and it's still so clear how good of a game it is. The remake by Bluepoint was fantastic, visually stunning, but it kept the game largely the same, which means that it still has the same issues with its gameplay and the original development of the game, which wasn't as straightforward as the rest. You see, it actually had no coherent vision originally. Miyazaki was brought in midway to help turn the game into what we know today. The whole way though, they had this fear that that vital, challenging design that leads to the sense of accomplishment would be shunned, and they'd be forced to tone it back or down by Sony. So there was a lot of trepidation with this game. The prototype Dark Souls in many ways, but well worth playing if you're a fan of the current games, especially with that remake. So I do love it, flaws and all. And even if it is dated mechanically and design-wise, I still think it's wonderful and worthy of a B grade compared to the rest for these reasons. But finally, we have our last game on the list. Of course, it's Dark Souls 2. Where am I gonna place it? Number 1, obviously? No, very predictably, it's the lowest rated of the series for me. However, again, that doesn't make it a bad game. We're talking masterpieces compared to great games, and Dark Souls 2, it is a great game. A massive step forward for the series in terms of PvP, that's for sure. Compared to Dark Souls 1, you got match-made PvP with awesome new combat additions like the power stance or the new combat tech. It was honestly the best PvP for a really long time in the series, even over Bloodborne in many people's opinions. The world was still interesting and fun, the music was still brilliant, the levels vast and ambitious, but maybe a bit too ambitious was the problem. While the concepts were incredible, things like underground lakes leading you to a horrible frog-based siren that you've heard singing the whole way, that reveal of the Dragon Aerie, my god, or the Firelink Shrine in the calming sunset of Majula, the boss like the Mirror Knight that can have players be summoned in and leap through his shield to fight you at the same time. What a concept. There's so many awesome moments in that game that I'll never forget. There was just so much to the game, with 4 DLCs, 1 majorly updating and changing the game, for the better actually. Problem, I think the major problem for many, was how bloated it was as a game. It felt like they really stretched out, speaking of that lake, really stretched out areas massively, unnecessarily. It felt like it went on and on and on in many areas, leaving things feeling a bit fillery compared to the main series, which was more minimal and efficient in its design. I really did enjoy the unique journey that Dark Souls 2 provided, but its story and its bloated design, that soiled it for me and many, I'm sure. So I think it's a fun and important game, but the lowest in the series in terms of my ratings today. But there you have it. That is my ordering and tier list of the Soulsborne series. What do you think? Do you agree with my rankings generally, or how would you change it? Of course, this was really hard to make in a video that's meant to concisely explain each one. There's so much more that I could say about each of these games. I could go on about each of them for half an hour minimum. They made it very difficult to make this video, so hopefully you can understand why I tried to keep it short. But I am interested to see how people view the series and the different titles and how they would rate them. But remember, please keep it civil. We all have our opinions, but please remember, they're just games, guys. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.